Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. In this video, we're going to start some pruning that we need to do in the garden here in Raleigh, North Carolina, right at the beginning of the season. You got to be careful with what you're pruning this time of year because some things bloom just in a few weeks. And we're right here at the end of February. There's actually a little bit of frost this morning out here. And the things I'm pruning are things that bloom in the summertime, later in the summer, and they bloom on new growth. So they have to have new growth come onto the shrub in order to produce flowers. So in the case of this Caryopteris, it's going to have to get bigger to flower during this growing season. And I kind of want it to flower right at the height it flowered last year. So I want to cut it right back down exactly like I did last year to that exact same height. And hopefully it returns to about that same height. I will say that plants get more vigorous in time. Root systems get bigger. And so probably cutting it to the same height is going to produce a slightly larger shrub overall. That's just going to happen year over year as the plants get, again, more established out here in the garden. But back to the making sure you know what you have in your garden, because a lot of the flowering shrubs that are in this garden flower during the month of March, April, or May. Almost all of those things across the board you would not want to be pruning right now because they have the flower buds on them already. Okay, so the things you're going to see in this video are the things that flower later, and we're going to get them cut down a pretty good amount, most everything that you're going to show you in this video, because again, I'm trying to size control them. I want them to bloom and fruit or flower or whatever they do at the exact height I want them to do it at, and you're actually in full control of a lot of that. This Caryopteris is 3 years in the ground at this point. It blooms, gosh, the last 2 seasons, probably from June, we started seeing some flowers on it, and then right through the fall, heaviest flowering in the fall, which is what you'd expect on this. This is first choice Caryopteris. You can come in, Steph can come in here, you can see where I cut this last year. And so you can see right there is where I cut it, and it produced, on this branch right here, it produced 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 side branches, and then each of those again divided later on after they put on a little growth. But you can see exactly where I made that cut last year. I really don't want to go below that, so I'm just going to come up onto these 5 stems and cut them, and we can be super careful here and cut them right to a bud on the stem. So I think maybe, I don't know if you'll be able to see this, but behind my finger there's a couple of buds where the branches are going to come. I can cut just above one of those on a slight angle, and I know exactly where that growth will emerge. A lot of times if you're pruning some shrubs, and I'll show you on another one in just a minute, I can prune the branch on the side of the branch where I want the growth to actually go. But this one has opposite growth. You'll see a bud on both sides of the stems. A lot of plants will have one on one side and then one on the other, just alternate, rotating back and forth. But these are opposite. You can see that both sides of the stem have that. So, I mean, really, at the end of the day, this is about using a pair of sharp pruners. If you've got any dead growth down in the plant, I do have some anvil pruners that I keep with me. There's a video on the channel about all things pruners. Anvil pruners just pinch the branch against a solid piece of steel and work really, really well for dead branches. Dead branches will dull your very sharp pruners that you're using in your garden. So if you have, again, dead branch running up in it, you need to cut it off. That's what I would use. But I'll go through here just above. If there's available buds, I'll go just above them. If there's not, then, you know, there's dormant buds in there that will definitely, this one right here, there's a bud on the main stem, so I'm just going to take that whole piece off. And pretty quickly, we can make quick work. You do not have to be this precise on this thing. I tend to do this with the YouTube channel, going through here and being very precise. It probably, if there wasn't a camera on me right now, I probably wouldn't be looking for every one of these buds along the stems and be just going after it much faster. I doubt I'd have any actually any issues from that. I have a couple suckers out here. This is a good time of year to be on the lookout for suckers. This plant is coming up from the roots away from where I actually planted it. And I don't want this thing to go cruising through the garden. So my choices are to come over here with a shovel and cut this away from the parent plant, and then dig that out is probably my best solution. I think though that I can just, because our soil has been so prepped over the last few years, I can get that out. That's another plant. I could take this right now and cut it back. I mean, this is kind of indiscriminate pruning I'm doing. I keep closing up this pair of pruners as I'm using them. Okay, but there's another plant. I can actually root prune this a bit. And we could drop this in a container for a few weeks, and it would flush out new roots, flush out new growth on the top, and then it could go into the garden if we wanted it, by taking it out the way I just took it out, okay? And then we'll just get in here, and I'll get the rest of this taken out real quick. So I think you can see this is pretty much exactly a foot tall. A few scraggly branches up here on top. I can get in here and clean up if I want to. I desuckered it. I think that's kind of important because a lot of these shrubs can become colonies. It may be okay, you know, if I planted this on a bank, that might be ideal, you know, because that's another spot where roots are rooting in and it could hold that bank in place. But in general, you know, your ornamental plants in beds, if you lose control of them that way and they become those types of colonies, a bit hard to control. We were out of town for 3 months out of like 4.5 in this place, and we had leading up to that, we had the construction on the outside of the house and several other things going on. So the garden has definitely looked less, you know, 2 summers ago it looked better than this past summer. And again, that construction going on. So we're kind of really anxious right now to get these things pruned, to get fertilizing done and other projects done, and then we can get this thing mulched and back up to, you know, looking pretty pristine again, because it's actually gone through a weird dip. But I mean, when you're getting construction done and things like that, and you're not here to maintain it, you know, that's what happens. Hydrangea paniculata. These are. There's a video on the channel about all things hydrangeas that you can go back and take a look at from last year, and we discuss which ones bloom on new wood and which ones bloom on old wood. Very important. The main ones you wouldn't want to be pruning right now are your big leaf hydrangeas, or either your mountain hydrangeas like Hydrangea serrata, or big leaf hydrangeas like Hydrangea macrophylla. Definitely not pruning. Hydrangea quercifolia, or native oak leaf hydrangea, you wouldn't want to be pruning. But arborescents are native to the southeast. One that blooms on new wood can be cut back down to the ground actually this time of year. And then the paniculatas like this, which have become so popular, Limelight being the most popular of them. This one's called Moon Dance, and you can see how compact it is and where it flowered last year. This is a great one. This is a Southern Living Plant Collection one. I can size control this and get it to flower at the height that I want it to flower at. Again, it's because it blooms on new wood. It's going to have to grow in order to in order to produce flowers. So it's going to end up much taller than we really want it. We're just trying to get the flowers right above this fence out by the road. Worked perfect last year. I cut it down to about 1.5 feet, and it responded just like this. Didn't have to do anything else. The wood on this one is a little bit heavier. And also down here in the old growth on these hydrangeas, it's a little harder to tell where the buds are along the stems. So you're really not, I don't think, going to get down in here and get too exacting as to where you want to cut it. Up here higher on these branches, you can see the buds where they're going to be. So if I was just simply going to allow it to get bigger, I could come in here and just clean these flowers up, right above a bud on the branch, just like that. You don't have to cut these flowers off, but either. You really don't have to do any pruning on this if you're just going to allow it to get bigger. But I can go through here and just in general clean it up if I wanted to, take the flowers off. But for me, I'm removing a good part of the plant and it will grow all season. These don't bloom until summertime. They're a little different than some of the earlier flowering hydrangeas. But this, I just come in here with a heavier tool and just cut them basically all the same height. You can see, I can see where I cut it last year. I'm actually going to go lower than that. This will look like I'm killing the plant, but I'm really not. I can also take the opportunity while I'm down in the middle of these plants to get any crossing branches out, and I'll show you that in just a minute. There's a couple that are just growing right up through the middle that I'd probably, the plant would probably be better off without them. It's hard to say if I've got it or not. Again, this is going to look mean, but if you want it to bloom where you want it to bloom, then there you go. If you've got, again, any branches that are kind of twisting around other things as they come up through the middle of the plant, we can go down in the and just cut those out a little bit lower. That way there's no rubbing in the middle of the plant later on in the season. Any if you feel like you just have too many coming up, that was another opportunity probably to use my anvil pruners. There's a dead branch. Okay, and as mean as that looks, if you're following the channel, by June or July, it's going to be absolutely beautiful and back in full bloom again. We have this white Calicarpa Americana that I got from Buddy Lee a couple of years ago. It's a really compact form, but our American Calicarpa, our native Calicarpa, can get 15, 20 feet in height over time. And so even one that was selected to be more compact and a little more slower growing, it's still over time going to get quite large. And again, it's just in this spot, in this small garden in Raleigh, that's not going to work for us. And also, again, this is another plant that flowers along new growth. So these stems last year, and you can actually still see it. I'm going to cut one of these off and you can still see it. So I cut this last year about a foot more than what I just cut off. And then what happened was, this is where the berries formed along the stem. So this was the first flowers on the plant, second flowers on the plant, third flowers, fourth flowers, and then the maturity of the berries back here, they matured sooner, turned white sooner, and eventually, once they fermented a tiny bit in the fall, birds came along and took them all, and they took them all in like one day. I think we may have included that in a video, but you can see the progression of the flowers that happened on this brand new stem last year. Imagine if I don't prune this thing, the new growth is going to start somewhere in here, and this is where the flowers are going to be. And it's going to get bigger and bigger and bigger all season long. So that's why I'm size controlling. It's not hurting the plant in any way, shape, or form, and I can get it in this exact same size again this year. And this is not any different than what I did on that hydrangea just a second ago. It's kind of a free-for-all down here. There's you can't really see any buds here, but there's tons of dormant buds along the stems on something like this. So where I cut it ain't gonna matter all that much. Okay, may even go below that one. And I may need a bigger tool for this. Okay, may have to break out the bigger loppers. I think I got all that cut away. All this material can go through a small electric chipper, gas chipper, something like that, and just be reused in the garden immediately. Last year I did this exact same thing on the clethra. This is another native flowering shrub here to the southeast United States. Great plant, really love these. They also bloom on new wood, and so you would think that all your new wood things I could cut to the ground like that. I did that on these last year, and we got way, way less flowers. And so what I think I'm gonna do with the clethra is just rotate to like a once every 3 years. I'll reset, prune them, and kind of expect a few less flowers on them, because I do have to keep them slightly smaller out here, but I do know that if I do now if I do any really substantial pruning on them, I lessen the amount of flowers. Whereas all of the other plants, because they had more branching, I ended up with more flowers. I talked about the root sucker over there on the Caryopteris, and I showed you how I cut it away, and to be careful not letting some of your plants colonize, because lots of these, especially deciduous flowering plants, they tend to have, you know, an ability to sucker over time and kind of colonize a space, and sometimes can cost themselves flowers, crowd themselves out, you know, reduce the air movement through them, all kinds of reasons. Again, there probably are times though where suckering would be beneficial, like on a bank or something like that. This cestrum suckers like crazy. This is Cestrum parkii. It blooms all summer long. Probably the #1 thing in this garden for hummingbirds overall, and we have a lot of hummingbird, basically candy, out here across this entire garden. And this is probably the plant that rules them all. Really kind of funky smelling foliage. Some people say they like it, some people say they don't. Invasive in some places on the planet, but here in zone 7B, 8A, Raleigh, North Carolina, we have a control for it called winter, and that keeps it from having any issues here. When I cut this thing down, again, this is another one, all of the growth you see here happened last year from me cutting it down right to the ground, and I'm about to do the same thing again. But after I cut it to the ground, I'm gonna get 30 new suckers coming up on it, little wispy things down here at the bottom. What I did last year is I just chose these 4 or 5 that were all going a slightly different direction, and ended up with this perfect little tree last year. But that's all I'm gonna do for now, is just literally cut the thing down to the ground, and take all these small ones off first that came up later in the season. And then but we'll have to do some more work on it later. But it's easy peasy pruning. Okay, fall back toward the camera, but that's it. This thing, amazingly enough, will be 6 or 7 feet tall in full bloom in about 4 months. It'll look like a nice looking shrub even before it starts flowering. And then once it starts flowering, maybe 1st of June, it'll flower right through the fall until it gets a frost on it. There are a ton of pruning videos on the channel over the last few springs of talking about what can and can't be pruned in these late winter months. Definitely any kind of leafy evergreen thing that you're using for just screening or something like that. You don't care about the flowers all that much. You know, you can prune those things in the late winter. But we have any of your flowering things in your garden. There's an azalea right in front of this butterfly bush that I'm about to cut. That azalea definitely has flower buds on it, and it's going to bloom in the next few months. We just moved it out here to a little more sun, so it needs to be a little fuller, and it does need to be pruned because it's a little thin from being in too much shade for a little while. But I'm going to wait for it to flower first. But here's a couple more Hydrangea paniculatas and a butterfly bush. Butterfly bushes, I get, you know, the main issue with pruning butterfly bushes way back, #1, I'm trying to have them flower at the exact height that I want them to flower. And I know that if I cut this down to about 1 foot tall, it will bloom at about 4 or 5 feet. We've got another one out in the front garden, an older variety that's far more vigorous, and it'll get 8 feet tall, even cutting it down to the ground this time of year. So part of it is, you know, little dwarf ones, and then middle-sized growing ones, and then larger growing ones, and they can grow that much in a single year. What happens, especially on the bigger growing varieties, is because they have to get bigger in order to flower, they get bigger and bigger and bigger, and these are pretty weak wood. I'm gonna cut this off so this doesn't matter all that much. But this thing, I can break very thick branches on this butterfly bush very easily. And what will happen is if all this material is 8 feet tall, allowed to get 8 feet tall and bigger and bigger and bigger, if you get an ice storm in the wintertime, it can potentially just break these things apart. I've seen them completely destroyed by ice and snow. So that's one of the reasons that I size control them every year, because keeping them this small, they don't seem to be as vulnerable to being destroyed by storms. These, again, we can get in here and get uber specific and cut them right above a bud, because there's growth on it, right? So it's pretty easy to see, right where it will leaf or branch from. We can just go right down to them, but there's no, I don't think it matters too much with one of these butterfly bushes. And you can cut them to 18 inches tall, you can cut them to 12 inches tall, whatever's required. I'm gonna cut this one down to about 8 inches, and I did this 2 years in a row, and it blooms right at about 5 feet. This is about the most foliage I've ever seen on our butterfly bushes in February. We've had very little winter. We did have a couple 16-degree nights, and I thought that would have shut them down a little bit more, but this is kind of wild, how much growth they actually, and this is just growth at this point that's coming out on them. It's kind of interesting. It makes no difference in whether or not I'm gonna cut it back or how far I'm gonna cut it back or any of that, but it is interesting how they didn't go quite as dormant. We always in the South will keep some foliage on ours for sure, but this is kind of, to the point of, basically it's leafed out. I'll just go about to where I went with it last year. There's a dead branch down there that definitely calls for the other kind of pruners, the anvil pruners. And again, here's a great opportunity while I'm down here in this butterfly bush. Here's a branch that's coming off the side. Here's a big branch here. It's got a branch that goes right back to the middle. I broke it off by accident. I'll make a better cut. And another one right there. Where's this branch gonna, it's already rubbing the one that's underneath it. It's just gonna continue to do damage. There's another one. See how easy they break? There's another one running through as well. Any of these branches that are just running across other branches, just go ahead and take the opportunity to get those taken care of. And any that I just broke, I'll make a clean cut on them. But that's pretty much it. If you've got any suckers running out from it, we're cleaning this material up. We'll chip these stems for our paths back here, and then we're going to be putting fresh hardwood mulch back here, and this will look all neat and everything, but I don't want to do any of that work until we get in here and do all this work. I think if you told me when we started this project we'd have 8 butterfly bushes in the garden, I'd have said probably not, but somehow that has happened. They're all different and interesting in some way, and 5 of the 8 are dwarfs. These are the Butterfly Candy series. Really great butterfly bushes. This one's called Lil Coconut. They're like Lil Grape, Lil Raspberry. They're all Lil something because they all stay dwarf and compact in the garden. Lil Coconut is obviously white. Same thing on these. I got a question a week or 2 ago, should I cut my dwarf butterfly bushes too? And again, you don't have to, but this is the size I want it blooming, right? Even these dwarf ones are gonna have to get bigger in order to flower if we're not doing some sort of pruning on them. And I also look at this as an opportunity to get down into the middle of the plant and see what's going on as well. Like I just did on that other butterfly bush, I was able to cut out some cross branches that were obviously going to kill themselves or another branch at some point, and clean the area up. This I can go back to my regular pruners on a dwarf butterfly bush and just cut above any of this growth along these stems, and super quick and easy to do this. Any of this dead material that was down in the bottom that didn't have any light can all be cut out at the same time. And again, any crossing branches. And that's it. We'll come back in here and mulch around this. Actually, it's going to get fertilized first. And here's a root sucker out here on the edge Make sure I get any of those up. Again, any kind of weeds or anything that grew over here around it or were hiding underneath it during last summer. All done. So there you go. That's some of our deciduous plants, the plants that go dormant during the winter time, lose most of their leaves. The butterfly bushes, not so much. How we prune them in this late winter time, because again, I'm trying to, you know, the new growth is where the flowers are going to be, so let's just take the rest of it off. But be super careful, again, with what you're pruning in your garden this time of year. There's lots of things that I'll be pruning over the course of the spring, and some of them will be waiting for them to flower first before that happens. There'll be another video on leafy evergreen things that I can prune this time of year coming up in the next week or so. And it's just abelia and camellias that are finishing blooming and several other things in the garden that can be pruned as the flowering winds down on them in the late winter, or they bloom much, much later in the summer. So that video will be up soon. Thanks for following along.